Oklahoma TCU coming up at noon Eastern time, of course, 11 a.m. where it counts. TCU coming in at 3-0. We got Melissa Treebwasser on the line. Melissa, how you doing? Oh, we can't hear you. I don't know if
Let's try that again. I'm doing
there you
well.
are.
How are you guys?
Doing great. Good to see you. It's been a long time.
Has been a while.
Absolutely. You can join Melissa on Frogs Today. What have you been up to?
We're just enjoying a 3-0 start and made the move over to Frogs today. And we're doing lots of great stuff over there. Lots of multimedia, podcasts, video work, coaches show, all kinds of great stuff. So it's been a lot of
Awesome.
fun.
That is really cool stuff. Well, tell us about this team that a lot of people across the country haven't seen yet, but they're going to get familiar with TCU on Saturday, coming in at 3-0. We got a familiar name at back at quarterback, though.
Yeah, I think that Max Duggan, the things that came out of him in fall camp are just consummate professional. He's a guy who started almost 30 games coming into the season, lost the starting job to Chandler Morris ahead of the Colorado game. And then when Morris sprained a knee in the third quarter, stepped in and has just been a completely different quarterback for TCU so far this season. His accuracy, his fit in the Sonny Dykes, Garrett Riley offense has been incredible. And he's just making really good decisions with the football. Doesn't have the turnovers that plagued him and is making the throws that he needs to make. So it's been great. I think for those of us that have followed his career, Max, his intangibles, his leadership, all of those qualities that you want your quarterback to have, he's always possessed, but he's putting it together on the field now too. And he's definitely got the weapons to do so. I think he'd be even better if he got a little bit of protection from the offensive line, but he's made the most of this opportunity and the situation. And with Chandler Morris set to dress for Oklahoma's game, I think Sonny Dykes is going to have another really difficult quarterback decision to make in the coming weeks.
Yeah, if anybody knows Max Duggan's story, he's an easy guy to root for. He's faced a lot of real life adversity, and wow, he has come through a lot to accomplish what he's done, and he keeps bouncing back from a football standpoint as well. So Sonny Dykes wins this matchup 2 consecutive years on the SMU side. Then he comes to the good side, to TCU, and of course, get it done 42-34 last week. Before we move on with the 22 version of the Horned Frogs, I'm curious because obviously you were a big supporter of Gary Patterson, of course, did a phenomenal job, built this program, made it a national power. I've always ranked him extremely high among coaches' rankings. He was phenomenal. There was a drop-off probably starting in that 2017 season. They made the Big 12 championship game, and then after that, recruiting wasn't quite as good as it was, and maybe the quarterback situation not what it had been. So just your thoughts about where the program was when Gary Patterson moved on and Sonny Dykes taking over.
Well, I'll correct one small thing on that. Recruiting actually has been exceptional since that 2017 season, which has made the last 4 years, I think, even more disappointing. So when you look on paper, the 4-star talent, even the couple 5-star guys TCU's been able to bring in has not translated to wins on the field. And so, Gary Patterson did more for TCU than any singular person, not just from an athletic standpoint, but for the university as a whole. But I think that, like everything, there comes a time for change, and change is inevitable. And what Jeremiah Donati, our athletic director, did in bringing in the polar opposite of Gary Patterson in every way, I think has boded really well for TCU. TCU was signing great talent, but Sonny Dykes is a great recruiter. And I think that there's a difference there. He's hired a staff that's young, energetic, that has made recruiting their number one focus and priority. And so not only are they continuing to sign high level players, especially with how late he came in last year, but they understand how to build TCU back into a brand that young people want to be a part of. And that's part of it too. He also is very open. TCU was one of the most locked down programs in the country over the last 20 years. It was like Fort Knox getting into their practice, and Sonny Dykes has really just thrown open the gates to practice, to publicity. I mean, we've got true freshmen giving interviews on media days, things that just were unimaginable. Assistant coaches are accessible. You can talk to them anytime. Just a completely different environment and atmosphere around the program. How that's going to translate to wins on the field, I mean, I think this year, despite the 3-0 start, most people are kind of expecting, hey, let's get to a bowl game, let's maybe get to 7 wins and just get this program back on the right track. But for Sonny Dykes to fully get TCU back to being a nationally ranked program, it's going to take some time. After so many years of success, the last 4 years have really been a struggle for the Frogs in every aspect. And so the energy, the enthusiasm around the program, the swagger that this team has, and just the joy that they play with, I think that's been kind of the biggest parts of these turnaround that not only the fan base, but the media has noticed. And so if he can translate that into wins as well, there's nothing keeping TCU from being one of the powerhouse programs in the new look Big 12, other than the fact that they just have to go out there and prove it on the field.
Yeah, so Melissa, just one question I have here off the front, just from the outside looking in, from the Oklahoma perspective. TCU relatively untested, on the young seed.
Very, very untested. They haven't played anybody with a pulse.
Do have a little bit of respect for SMU, especially what they've been able to do offensively. But coming into this game, against Oklahoma had played a lot better defensively first 3 games. Then game 4 against Kansas State, not so much. They kind of regressed a little bit. What are some of your kind of key matchups on your side, and what you think the kind of the outlook of from a TCU perspective looking in at this Oklahoma team this week?
I think the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is just the offensive line play. It's certainly better than it's been the last couple of seasons, but that's been one of the biggest issues that TCU has faced on that side of the ball. I mean, they've had great running backs, they've had great wide receivers, they've had good enough quarterback play, but the protection has still just been substandard. And I think that that's something that's going to turn around, but it's going to take time. Again, they've recruited well at the position. They've lost some guys to the transfer portal, but they just haven't come together to play as a unit yet. And I think the talent is there. They've gotten better each week, but you saw it on Saturday against SMU, which isn't exactly known as a defensive powerhouse even. And Max was still kind of running for his life most of that game, which is why I don't expect Chandler Morris to play on Saturday. But I think that if they can open up some holes, if they can pass protect, and if they can get that running game going early, that's going to go a long way into giving TCU the opportunity to keep up offensively with Oklahoma, which might be a different type of team than it was under Lincoln Riley, but can still put up some points. I mean, that's for sure. That hasn't been the issue. I'm also really excited to see what TCU secondary, or maybe not excited, maybe terrified of what TCU secondary does against Oklahoma wide receivers. I think with Mims and Theo Weiss out there, just 2 of the most talented, physically gifted receivers in the country. And with Travius Hodges-Tomlinson matched up against Rashee Rice on Saturday, was a bad matchup for TCU. Rice was either making plays or drawing penalty flags. Maybe some of those were a little bit kind of iffy, but when you have a big physical receiver with a big name like that, they're going to get those calls. And so I'm interested to see what Joe Gillespie does with Josh Newton, who's arguably been TCU's best player in the secondary so far this season, and how many of those one-on-one matchups we see versus how much safety help TCU gives over the top. I think Bud Clark is expected to be back in the lineup on Saturday at the safety position. That'll go a long way towards shoring up that back end. But the Frogs have been vulnerable to the big play, which again is something that's plagued them throughout the Gary Patterson years. But the 3-3-5 is built to kind of take that away. Dylan Gabriel can connect on a couple of those big throws early with the running game that the Sooners have. I think that could spell trouble for TCU.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm sorry, Mark, but just one little comment here. I think it's interesting. I think Oklahoma fans are just sick and tired of seeing these big score games. And unfortunately, I think the way this is trending is this will probably be another shootout. I think, to your point, in terms of maybe the weaknesses on both teams is probably the defensive side of the ball. And so I think offensively, it looks like both teams have an opportunity to put up a lot of points in this game. And as you mentioned, maybe Oklahoma's offensive line, has over the last couple of years have not played as well. They've seemed to kind of solidify themselves over the last couple of games here. Ran for over 200 yards. So maybe it'll end up being one of those games in which which defense can force a key mistake, key turnover, key interception at some point. But I expect this to be kind of an up and down close game, fourth quarter game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be so interesting because if you go back to this matchup a season ago, TCU fans were apoplectic because Gary Patterson punted from the Oklahoma side of the field on like a 4th and completely changed the complexity of the game. But the one thing Gary Patterson it's consistent, and he was always going to play to the defense's advantage, which going into games against Oklahoma, especially under Lincoln Riley, was not often going to be a successful way to approach. Whereas Sonny Dykes is certainly willing to just keep throwing the football, keep trying to move the ball down the field. And I think he'd be, honestly, I TCU's chances are better if this game turns into a shootout versus a defensive battle, because I just don't think the Horned Frogs have the depth or really the comfort in this system to be able to slow Oklahoma down enough to make this a defensive win. I think you're going to have to put 40 on the board. And I think the first team to get to 40 on Saturday probably has the advantage and ultimately the win.
So unless Jason has anything else, Melissa, before we let you go, for people watching TCU for the first time on Saturday, and that's going to be a lot of people with an ABC game starting the day, are there a couple guys on each side of the ball to look out for that may not have enough recognition that may splash this season?
Yeah, I think, Kendre Miller is probably one of the more underappreciated offensive talents in all of college football. If you watch what he did in the first half against SMU and some of the games that he had last year, Texas Tech comes to mind. He is an absolute talent. He's currently leading the country in yards per carry. I think it's 7.9, edging out Zach Evans, a former TCU Horned Frog who's now playing at Ole Miss, by 0.1 yards a carry. Nobody's paying attention to that, I'm sure. But he's a great player. But the offensive player, if you like fun football, the guy to keep your eye on is Darius Davis. He's a 5th-year senior who is a special teams maven. I think he's tied the career record for return touchdowns at TCU last Saturday, and on a kind of a little screen pass, bubble sweep type thing, he hit the fastest recorded speed in football, like in the NFL or in college football this season, at almost 24 miles per hour. And so if he gets loose in the open field, he's gone. I mean, you can pretty much throw up the deuces. You're not catching him. So those are the two guys on offense that I'll be paying attention to. I'd love to see Quentin Johnston get going, but I think most people know who he is. Defensively, I mentioned Josh Newton, the transfer from ULM, just a guy that not a lot of people had heard of. He's been great this season, arguably, like I said, TCU's best defensive player. And Marcel Brooks might make an appearance back from injury as well. That's the emotional leader for TCU. So even if he's dressed and doesn't get a lot of action, he's a guy to keep an eye on the sidelines, because he'll be the one firing everybody up for sure.
Well, that sounds like the TCU of old. They always seem to have like one or two of the fastest players in the country.
Yeah. And Darius Davis is big time fast. Like I say, if there is any green in front of him, I mean, he's Kavonte Turpin-esque when he has the ball in his hands. And I think he's got a chance to be one of those guys that gets an NFL camp invite just based on what he can do in the return game alone.